As Judge Marie Matthews laid down her final decisions, she granted Linda Thompson the right to stay in the house until their kids finished high school, with her soon-to-be ex-husband, Jack, responsible for covering the mortgage and utility costs. She was also awarded 50% of Jack's business value, while keeping her vehicle with him responsible for the remaining payments. Linda would receive a hefty 60% of all shared assets, including bank accounts, investments, and retirement funds. Additionally, Judge Matthews awarded Linda primary custody of the children, allowing Jack visitation every other weekend and 2 consecutive weeks each summer. Child support was set at $750 per child, adding up to a monthly total of $1,500. Since Linda had been out of the workforce for the last 5 years, the judge granted her $3,000 a month in spousal support. With all orders declared, Judge Matthews banged her gavel to close the proceedings. Just as she began to rise from her seat, I said one word that froze everything: no. She stopped in mid-movement, her gaze snapping over to me so quickly I thought her head might pop off. Her expression was pure shock, as though she couldn't believe someone had dared to defy her in her own courtroom. With a slow, deliberate motion, she lowered herself back into her chair, her look of surprise hardening into sheer anger. Her glare could have melted glass. "Excuse me," she asked sharply. "What is so hard to understand about a simple 2-letter word? If that word is confusing, I am happy to spell it out for you." I responded, "Oh, I understand perfectly, Judge, and frankly, I could not care less. I came here fully prepared for this." Inwardly, I savored what was about to happen in the next few minutes. "I will give you 1 minute to apologize," she said coldly, "or I will hold you in contempt of court." "Well, at least you'll have one ruling right today," I shot back. "I hold nothing but contempt for this farce you're running here." At that moment, my lawyer was hissing at me, practically tearing through his briefcase in a desperate attempt to silence me. "30 days in jail for contempt?" she said with a sneer, her gavel landing hard. "Oh, are we in Australia now?" I asked, because I am seeing a lot of kangaroos in here. Meanwhile, my lawyer was practically yelling in my ear, trying to clamp his hand over my mouth. 60 days, she growled. "Care to go for more?" "Judge," I smirked, "maybe if you got laid once in a while, you would not be so unpleasant." Raising my right hand, I gave her the middle finger. "Here's a little something for you," I said. Then, I raised my left hand to match. "And here's another for good measure. Maybe a little fun would make you a less bitter, man-hating tyrant." At that moment, I actually thought someone might need to call an ambulance. Her face turned so red, and her fury so palpable, that I half expected her head to burst. It was almost shocking that I did not see smoke rising from her ears. 90 days, she hissed, her voice almost unrecognizable. Just then, the bailiff stepped in and grabbed hold of me. My lawyer looked absolutely defeated, and for a brief moment, I felt a little bad for the guy. The entire courtroom was silent, staring at me in shock as I could not hold back laughter any longer. That laughter likely explained why the jail psychologists came to visit over the next few weeks. Unsurprisingly, the following day, a letter from my lawyer's firm arrived, informing me they were dropping me as a client. Now, you might wonder what all of this was about. So, a little backstory. My name is Jack Thompson. I am 36 years old, born and raised in the American Midwest to a hardworking, middle-class family. Growing up, I learned the value of traditional principles. Respect for those who earn it, keeping promises, working hard, sharing what you have, and treating others as you wish to be treated. Most people call it the golden rule, but there is another side to that rule. Treat others as they treat you. Turning the other cheek might be the Christian thing to do, but it never quite suited me. With a stubborn streak a mile wide and a strong sense of justice, things sometimes got messy. Once I set my mind on someone doing me wrong, I'd chart a course of action and stick to it, no matter what. Back in high school, I was dating this girl named Cindy L. Harrison for a couple of months. We ended up having a fight, though I can't even remember now what it was about. Things got heated, and we decided to break up, but really, it was more like a short cooling-off period. We both kind of knew that by Monday. We'd apologize and get back together. It wasn't the first time this had happened. It was almost routine for us. But on that particular Saturday night, as I was passing by the theater, I caught sight of my cousin Hank escorting Cindy into the movies. Now, Hank and I were more like brothers than cousins. We were the same age, practically glued at the hip since we were kids, and he lived just down the block from me. He knew about Cindy and me, and that our break was likely just temporary, but he went for it anyway. Right then, Hank became dead to me. When Cindy tried to talk to me on Monday, I refused to acknowledge her. At church on Sunday, Hank approached me, but I just stared straight through him. His family joined us for dinner that night, and I ignored him completely, even when he tried playing video games with me. Our parents tried to mediate, but I refused to let it go. Even a year later, when I actually stole his girlfriend in return, I still wanted nothing to do with him. I even gave him a black eye when he confronted me about it, and that was the last of it. Years later, he sent me a wedding invitation, which I ignored. When I married Linda, I sent out invitations to all our extended family, except Hank. So, yes, I can hold a grudge with the best of them. If someone wrongs me, I am not one to forgive unless it was a genuine mistake. What Hank and Cindy did was intentional. Now, if you're reading this and thinking I'm a bit of a jerk, let me just say, you play, you pay. If you mess up, you should deal with the consequences. Drive drunk and get caught? You should lose your license, pay higher insurance, and do the community service. I call that a stupid tax. Same for a girl who gets pregnant young because she didn't use protection. Her stupid tax is 18 years of parenthood. And if a guy ends up in a similar situation, he should step up and take responsibility. That is what I call personal accountability. I worked hard throughout high school, kept my grades high, earned a few scholarships, and went to college. Despite getting into a few fights over my beliefs, I stayed in good shape and was decent looking enough to do okay with the ladies. I graduated with a degree in economics and a minor in accounting, went on to earn an MBA, and landed a good job with a solid paycheck. With no major expenses, I started dabbling in the stock market, and to my surprise, I had a knack for it. A few months into my job, I met Linda at a party. We hit it off, went on a date, and things just took off from there. Linda was gorgeous, no question about it, and I was not the only one who thought so. Whenever we went out, people stared. My friends would joke that if we ever split, they would be first in line, and even a few of my lesbian friends joked they would try to convert her if she became single. Eventually, I proposed. She said yes, and we got married. Now, I should mention that Linda went to college too. I like to joke that she went there for her MRS degree, basically, to delay adult life a few more years and find a husband to support her. She graduated with a degree in art history, which landed her a job at the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf. Yes, I will admit, I have my arrogant moments. After the wedding, Linda quit her job a week before and fully embraced the role of Susie Homemaker. Our life together was blissful. We had a great intimate life, and soon after, we bought a nice 3-bedroom house. I was doing well at work and bringing in some impressive returns from my stock market ventures. We were careful with our spending, living within our means, which allowed us to save a good chunk of money. Every bonus I received went straight into our investments, and I maximized my 401k contributions. My dream was to retire by 40 and live the good life, and I was on track to make it happen, thanks to hefty bonuses and promotions that kept me on the fast track up the corporate ladder. Then, a few years into our marriage, I came home one Friday night to find Linda dressed to the nines, a big smile plastered across her face. "Hurry up and get showered and dressed," she said. "We're celebrating tonight, Daddy." Wait, did she just say what I thought she said? My heart raced as I realized what she was hinting at. We had been trying for a baby for a few months, so it wasn't completely out of the blue. But still, hearing her call me Daddy was a surprise. I picked her up, spun her around, and kissed her all over, celebrating the news. We figured we might have to dial back on big outings due to her pregnancy and eventually the baby, but that night, we went all out. The next few months were filled with joy as we prepared for our new addition. Then came another shock. Linda was carrying twins. 2 little girls were on the way. I was over the moon, imagining myself with 2 little daddy's girls, ready to wrap me around their fingers. When the big day finally arrived, we rushed to the hospital, and a few hours later, our 2 beautiful, healthy daughters were born. They had all their fingers and toes, and though they needed to stay in the hospital a bit longer than usual, everything went smoothly. When we brought them home, both our families were there to welcome them, and everyone was thrilled. My mom seemed particularly elated, barely able to take her eyes off her new granddaughters. Life changed quickly. I realized that working for a big company was keeping me away from my family more than I liked. I had plenty of savings, so I decided to start my own company. With my background in investments and trading, I figured I would open my own investment firm. I got the licenses, and some of my friends and family became my first clients. Soon enough, even former colleagues began transferring their portfolios to me. Within a year, I had a solid client base and business was booming. But as the saying goes, the higher you climb, the farther you can fall. It was at the girl's second birthday party, a full-blown celebration with both families there, that everything changed. I had just finished using the master bathroom and was about to head back to the party when I overheard my mom talking to her sister in the hallway. "I just don't understand where those blue eyes came from," my mom said. "Have you asked Jack about it?" her sister asked. "Oh God, no. If he found out they might not be his, it would break him. He's so happy." I did not stick around to hear more. I quietly slipped back into the bathroom, locked the door, and tried to process what I just heard. Surely, the girls had to be mine. Someone in our families must have had blue eyes, right? I mentally went through every relative I could think of, but I could only remember shades of brown and hazel. The only family member with different eyes was my cousin Mary, who had green eyes, but that came from her dad's side, who wasn't even a blood relative. I started thinking about Linda's family, but I could not recall anyone with blue eyes there either. After a while, I forced myself to calm down and head back to the party, pretending everything was fine. I managed to smile and interact with everyone, but my mind was racing with thoughts and plans. That night, after putting the girls to bed, I took a closer look at their features. I could see parts of Linda in them, but there were traits I did not recognize, and none that I could definitely say came from me. The next day, while Linda napped with the girls, I went online and ordered a few supplies to be delivered to my office. I used a business credit card so she would not see the invoice. I also started researching local private investigator firms. The idea that Linda might have cheated on me nearly 3 years ago was gnawing at me, and I could not shake it. If she had betrayed me then, was she still unfaithful now? I needed proof. A few days later, the items I ordered arrived. I also met with a private investigator from a firm called. I handed over all the details of Linda's phone, tablet, and laptop, giving them everything they needed to check her digital activity. At the same time, I started shifting some financial assets around. If it turned out that Linda had been faithful and the girls were indeed mine, none of these moves would matter. But if my suspicions were correct, if everything I suspected turned out to be true, I was determined that Linda would not see a cent of my money. There was no way I was going to bankroll her little escapades, and I sure as hell was not going to support kids that were not mine. Yes, the girls were innocent in all this, but so was I. If Linda wanted to fool around and get herself pregnant by someone else, then she could get him to foot the bill. Nothing was set in stone just yet, but I was waiting on concrete proof. 2 weeks later, I got the confirmation in a letter at my office. I made sure to close and lock the door before opening it, and when I read the words, I broke down and cried for an hour. Deep down, I had known the truth, but I had clung to the hope that I was wrong. The next day, the private investigator came by to give me the full rundown. Turns out Linda's personal trainer, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, was the real father. She had been seeing him regularly, even taking the girls to his apartment so he could spend time with his daughters. The audio confirmed that they both knew exactly who their biological father was. The following day, I met with a divorce attorney. I went in fully aware that I was about to get taken for a ride by the system. The lawyer tried to explain how the law worked, but I cut him off and told him how I worked. He pointed out that the law's focus would be on taking care of the kids, to which I replied that Linda and her trainer could handle that responsibility without my help. I gave the lawyer my conditions and left, and by the look on his face, he was probably starting to regret taking me on as a client. I had him draw up the paperwork, but instructed him to hold off on filing it until I gave the word. I may have led him to believe I was considering reconciliation. Okay, yes, I lied about that. Over the next 2 months, I quietly moved my finances around and adjusted things until, on paper, my net worth was effectively zero. I even set it up so that I had a measly old truck and the house, which was still weighed down by a hefty mortgage. We had refinanced to do some upgrades, so selling it would barely cover the brokerage fees. My luxury car was owned by the company, not by me personally, and I had about $10,000 stashed away in cash to cover my expenses for the next few months. Linda was caught off guard one weekend when my cousin Hank and his wife Cindy showed up. I explained to Linda that they had recently come to my office to talk, and after some soul-searching, they apologized for their past mistakes. I told her I had decided to forgive them and move forward. The truth? Well, yes, Hank and Cindy had indeed come to see me, and they did apologize. But there was a little more to the story. As it happens, Cindy's family has some connections. A few of her relatives are known to be the kind who do not mind a bar fight now and then, and some people even claim that a few might be enforcers for certain less than reputable business folks. Of course, this is all just small-town gossip. Coincidentally, a couple of days before Hank and Cindy came by, there was a report on the local news about a personal trainer at a gym who got mugged as he was leaving work. This particular guy, being blonde and blue-eyed, tried to put up a fight, but it turned out to be 5 against 1. The attackers stripped him of his wallet and car, beat him senseless, and left him with a broken jaw, shattered nose, multiple broken ribs, a dislocated kneecap, a broken arm, and some rather permanent damage to his manhood. The doctors said he would recover, but he might never be able to perform in certain ways again. On top of the physical assault, he later found out that his car had been chopped and sold for parts, his credit cards maxed out, his bank accounts emptied, and his identity put up for sale on the dark web. This guy would be dealing with the fallout for years. Police, of course, had no leads, since the attackers were wearing ski masks and gloves. Strangely, Linda seemed unusually down for about a week after this mugging. I figured she must have been worried about the rising crime in our area, and I even offered to increase security at the house for her peace of mind. But that did not seem to improve her mood much. I called my lawyer and told him to finalize the paperwork and file it. I wanted Linda to be served late Friday afternoon. He tried to convince me to make a few adjustments, but I was firm. By Tuesday, everything was ready for my review and signature, so I met him at his office to sign off on it. He again advised against my approach, but I figured I'd humor him a bit. In the end, I told him she could keep the house and even the investments. Of course, there was a catch. I wasn't paying another cent for anything. If she wanted to keep the house, she'd have to handle the mortgage and utility bills herself. As for the investment accounts, well, I had already emptied them over a month ago. I had no problem handing her 100% of nothing. What Linda didn't realize was that over the past weeks, I had quietly moved all my tools and equipment out of the garage, along with anything from my home office that I wanted to keep. Bigger items went to Hank and Cindy's ranch, while smaller things that didn't hold much value were moved to a one-bedroom apartment I had rented through an offshore LLC, which made ownership conveniently hard to trace. Finally, Friday morning arrived. I headed to work like usual, with Hank having helped me move my truck to the office earlier in the week. I dropped off my car, got in my truck, and headed to the bank. There, I emptied all accounts, leaving a token $200 in checking and savings. I also cleared out the safety deposit box and drove over to the ranch, where I stashed the cash and box contents with my other things. I didn't want to risk renting a new box at another bank, which could be discovered and seized, and I avoided any wire transfers to keep everything untraceable. You might be wondering why I trusted Hank and Cindy with all this. Simple. Family loyalty runs deep. Not to mention, the mortgage on their ranch was held by an offshore LLC with a certain hidden ownership, adding an extra layer of trust. Besides, despite our past differences, Hank and I were still family, and around here, you do not mess with family without consequences. By late morning, I headed back to the house, parking a couple of blocks away to check the GPS tracker on Linda's car. As expected, she was at the mall. I rushed home, parked in the driveway, and grabbed the last of my clothes and personal items from the garage, tossing them into the truck. I did not bother closing the garage or front door. As I was pulling away, my phone rang. It was Linda, likely wondering why her credit cards had stopped working at checkout. One last check of the GPS confirmed she was on her way back. So I laughed, tossed my phone onto the table, and drove off. After reaching my new apartment, I moved everything inside, cracked open a few beers, and took a moment to relax. Just as I was settling in, my new phone rang, a number only a select few had, and Linda was not one of them. "Hello," I answered. "She's been served. You'll get the video shortly," the voice on the other end informed me. "Thanks," I replied, ending the call. 10 minutes later, the video arrived by email. To say she was stunned would be an understatement. The footage captured her reaction as she was handed the papers, dropping like a sack of bricks. The server checked to make sure she was unhurt, then left, and the video ended. I would have loved to see her face once she started reading the divorce petition and realized I had both DNA and video evidence of her infidelity. From that point on, things moved at a glacial pace. I started getting calls from my old office. Linda had been trying to reach me, apparently not believing them when they told her I had resigned almost 2 weeks prior. Eventually, she even showed up in person, demanding to see me, which ended with the police escorting her off the premises. Hank called me a few times, mentioning how Linda had begun pestering him to find me. I think she figured out that his sudden appearance in my life was not just a coincidence. Restraining orders were filed both for my former office and for Hank, and eventually, she had to leave us alone. 2 weeks later, my lawyer reached out to her to ask for the name of her attorney. Turns out, she hadn't hired one yet. With only the cash in her purse and $300 I had left in our accounts, she was running out of funds fast and had started leaning on her parents for support. Meanwhile, I was lying low and taking it easy. I was not starting any new projects or leaving anything around that she could get her hands on. Eventually, she did get a lawyer, and the meetings were finally scheduled. I refused to attend any of the meetings myself, just passing along instructions to my lawyer. Not a penny more than what was already outlined. I heard that tempers flared during those sessions, and eventually, we had to move to arbitration, which meant I had to be present. Things went south pretty quickly. "Where's all the money?" Linda demanded. "What money?" I replied. "We're broke. I'm living in the cheapest single-bedroom apartment I could find." It was true. I had taken the apartment mostly because it was inexpensive and I knew the owner. As for the investments, checking and savings accounts, all gone. I had lost it all. Technically true, though I did not know exactly where that offshore cash was stashed. My lawyer offered, "We're giving her the house, with her name alone on the title." He could have sounded more assertive about it, but instead, he sounded like someone inspecting a tornado-ravaged home, noting that at least the rubble was not on fire. Linda screamed, "The mortgage is through the roof. There's no way I can afford it." From there, things went downhill fast. "Child support," she demanded. "Not my kids, not my problem." "Spousal maintenance," she insisted. "No income, no way," I replied. "She's demanding 70% of the liquid assets. Good luck finding them. They don't exist." 50% of the business? 50% of what? There's nothing left. Retirement accounts? What part of lost it all don't you understand? Arbitration was a disaster, and it all led to our big day in court with the infamous Judge Marie Matthews, the most man-hating judge anyone had ever seen. She had a reputation for coming down hard on men, especially if their wives had cheated. If a man cheated, he might as well bring a stretcher to carry out whatever was left of him once her gavel dropped. Now, before you start thinking I was a fool for trying to convince them there was no money, understand this. I was fully aware they could pull up account statements from a couple of months prior and see what had been there. I was not surprised when the judge used those numbers to determine how much I owed. But here was the thing. They had no way of accessing it. All I needed was time. Time to shift the money across various banks and accounts. At one point, I even pulled cash from one bank, split it among different banks, and opened accounts under a variety of names. Cindy's family's gag gift business came in handy here, too. They sold fake IDs for entertainment purposes only, which was printed right on the cards. For a bit more money, though, they could leave off the entertainment disclaimer, and voila, I had all the aliases I needed. Fast forward to me standing in front of the man-hating witch again. It was 60 days into my 90-day county jail stint. This was not state prison, but rather a county jail for shorter terms. "So, have you learned your lesson yet?" she sneered. "You mean the lesson about not marrying a cheater?" I learned that long before I entered your courtroom. I was referring to your attitude in my courtroom. The vein in her forehead looked like it might burst. Nope, can't say there's anything wrong with my attitude while being railroaded in a kangaroo court. You do realize I can extend your stay in jail, right? She looked ready to explode. Another 30 days for that comment. By the way, she continued, you haven't made your first 2 child support or spousal maintenance payments to your ex-wife. Where is your lawyer? Oh, I must have been mistaken in thinking judges needed to be smart. Thank you for setting me straight on that, I replied, feigning innocence. But let me explain, so it's clear, even to a 5th grader. I am in jail. I have no money. Therefore, I cannot send money. Since you're the reason I am locked up, I guess you're also the reason Linda can't get her hands on my money. The judge's face turned crimson, and before I knew it, I was back in my cell with an extra 90 days, 30 from my original sentence. Another 30 she'd already slapped on, and another 30 just to top it off. Honestly, jail was not as bad as you might think. The food was awful, but I still ate it. I had a decent bed, time to relax, and access to weights and workout equipment. Word about my courtroom clashes spread fast, earning me a few friends on the inside. Plus, as I mentioned, Cindy's family connections helped me stay safe. Only one real problem cropped up, courtesy of one of Linda's dumber cousins. He had some harebrained idea that he could get himself arrested on a minor charge, land in the same jail, and teach me a lesson. But the whole jail knew who he was before he even got through the gate, and they easily guessed his intentions. As he crossed the yard toward me, he got, accidentally, hit in the gut by someone throwing a football. He brushed himself off, but barely 20 feet later, he took a basketball to the side of his head, and the guy who threw it apologized profusely. Another accidental elbow caught him in the chin as he was helped up. I was far from clueless. The moment he drew back his fist, I got the signal, spun around, and delivered a swift kick to his groin with all the force I could muster. It was a clear 65-yard field goal. After all the accidents he'd endured, this seemed to be the final one, and he was taken off to the infirmary. 2 days later, he refused to come out to the yard, spending as much time in his cell as possible until his release. Soon enough, I found myself back before Judge Matthews. "Are you ready to apologize for your vile outburst in this courtroom?" she sneered. "Not sure what you mean," I replied, feigning innocence. "Perhaps you can at least keep a civil tongue and avoid extending your stay." "So, another judge will be taking over then?" I quipped. "You're standing on my last nerve," she shot back. I resisted the urge to suggest they keep EMTs nearby, just in case she actually did have a stroke. But she pressed on. "You haven't made a single child support or maintenance payment. You've also failed to cover the mortgage or utility payments as I ordered. I thought we went through this last time. As long as I'm stuck here in jail, I can't earn or access any money. Plus, they're not my kids, so I don't see why I should pay for them. My ex is a cheater, and I shouldn't have to finance her lifestyle. Maybe she can find a way to make money herself. And you already awarded her half the business, so she should be fine with that." Linda's lawyer spoke up. "Your Honor, we haven't been able to secure my client's share of the business. It appears that Mr. Thompson sold his company to an overseas buyer 2 months prior to the divorce filing, and we can't determine who the actual owners are to contact them about the court order." Suddenly, an attractive woman in the courtroom stood up and asked to approach. "Your Honor, I represent the board of directors for the firm that purchased Mr. Thompson's business. I have a motion to dismiss the ruling granting Mrs. Thompson any stake in this company. The sale was completed before the divorce, so this company is not part of the proceedings. We reject any claim of ownership in the business by Mrs. Thompson." "But what about the money from the sale?" Linda's lawyer asked. "Ownership and payments were transferred overseas," the woman replied smoothly. "I'm not privy to the exact details, but the funds have never entered U.S. jurisdiction and therefore aren't subject to domestic laws. Any claim to those funds would need to be addressed with Mr. Thompson directly, and likely in the country where the money is now located." "Which country would that be?" Linda's lawyer pressed. "The initial transfer was made in Belgium," she said, "but the funds were reportedly moved elsewhere shortly after. I'm not sure of the current location." Linda's lawyer, clearly frustrated, continued, Your Honor, my client is desperate. The house is in foreclosure after 3 months without mortgage payments, and the utilities are about to be shut off. My client's parents have helped as much as they can, but it's too much. She's taken a job as a waitress, but it barely covers the basics. The judge turned to me. Mr. Thompson, you have 1 week to bring all payments up to date. Oh, sure, I replied sarcastically. Just let me reach right into my pocket and pull out a few stacks. Oops, nothing there. I'm still here in jail, with no access to any funds. You keep ordering me to pay, but won't allow me the chance to work and earn money to comply. Mr. Thompson, the judge cut in. Your lawyer can access your accounts and transfer the funds to your ex-wife. First off, I countered, I don't have a lawyer, as you can clearly see. Second, where are these supposed accounts? If they exist, I'd love to see them because I've been saying this whole time. I am broke. Even if these phantom accounts were real, do you honestly think I memorized all the access information? I'd need my financial records to get bank account and routing numbers, and it's all moot because the accounts simply don't exist. If you believe otherwise, feel free to show me this mystery account information. She glared at me. What happened to the money in your checking, savings, and investment accounts? I told you last time, I said. It was a couple of very bad investments. I took a risk and lost everything. And what about the money from selling your company? The judge pressed. The company was struggling because of those investments, I replied. I had to sell it for cheap and use the payments to cover expenses. There's nothing left. Mr. Thompson, do you honestly expect this court to believe that nonsense? The judge asked. I just shrugged. Frankly, I don't care if you believe me. If you think I'm hiding something, go ahead and show me where this hidden money is. What I think is that my ex-wife siphoned off whatever she could and is trying to squeeze more out of me while fooling around with her boyfriends. That's absurd, her lawyer shouted. It makes as much sense as keeping me in jail where I can't access money and then demanding that I pay all these expenses, I shot back. Mr. Thompson, are you aware that I can keep you in jail until you pay? The judge threatened. I looked at her as though she'd just sprouted a third eye. All right, sure. Keep me here where I can't possibly meet your demands, and keep expecting me to magically come up with money. That sounds totally logical. 3 months passed, and in the meantime, Linda's life had taken a downturn. The house had been foreclosed, her Lexus was repossessed, and she was forced to move in with her parents, unable to afford rent for herself and the girls. She picked up 30 hours a week at a local diner, while Loverboy was finally released from the hospital, starting his long journey through physical therapy and dealing with his financial mess. His credit score had sunk so low that he couldn't open new credit accounts, his car insurance barely covered anything, and his high-deductible health insurance left him drowning in medical bills. Eventually, I hired a lawyer who struck a deal with the judge to let me out of jail so I could find work and start making payments. I had to surrender my passport, as they still suspected I had money hidden and might be a flight risk. Dutifully, I took a job at Taco Bell. By this time, I was living with Hank and Cindy on their ranch, aware that I was under watch for any hidden stash. The surveillance team stationed themselves along the road since they couldn't access ranch property. What they didn't realize was that most of my cash was already with me. For the next 3 months, Linda used a court order to garnish my wages, though Taco Bell's minimum wage job did not send much her way. During this time, Hank helped clear out my apartment and distributed my belongings among the extended family. Over the last few weeks, several packages had been sent to one particular location. Family barbecues became a regular occurrence, and whenever friends and relatives came by, they discreetly carry packages to their cars. As weeks passed, these packages were repackaged and sent away. I rarely left the ranch or went out, limiting my time to work and home. Eventually, Taco Bell filed a restraining order against Linda because she kept coming in, harassing me for money. Sure, they could have just fired me, but a bit of cash slipped to the manager took care of that. When I needed to meet with my lawyer, she came over to the ranch. Speaking of my lawyer, yes, I hired the very same woman who represented the new owners of my former company that day in court. Once she'd wrapped up that case, I brought her on to handle my legal affairs. A real shark in the courtroom, though I prefer to call her a barracuda, especially when she's skinny dipping in the pool. Sleek, agile, and ready to attack at any moment. And, well, she's got a considerable appetite, if you get what I mean. If you're wondering about my money, yes, I did sell my company, and no, I didn't sell it to myself. I was not about to give Linda any leverage to lay claim on it. I wanted liquid cash, plain and simple. Since the sale happened overseas and the funds never entered U.S. banks, Linda couldn't touch it. With the judgments against me, any money brought into U.S. accounts would be fair game for her, but that wasn't going to happen. The funds from the sale added up, along with my other investment accounts, nearing $10 million. Between the safety deposit box, checking and savings accounts, and cash stored in safes, I held on to about $200,000, some of which I used in my plans. I still had around $150,000 in cash, but had no intention of keeping it with me. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, with everything arranged, we held another family barbecue. The entire extended family came out, and the event was full of laughter, food, and good times. It was the perfect setting to put the final pieces in place for my plan. At the barbecue, I was busy helping Hank with the grill and smoker, while my lawyer, Amanda, was also there. Later in the afternoon, one of Cindy's uncles approached me. He thanked me for reconnecting with Hank and Cindy and for helping them out when they needed it. After chatting for a bit, he pulled out an envelope and handed it to me. I passed it over to Amanda, who tucked it away in her briefcase. As the night progressed, I made an announcement to the group. The lien holder for the ranch had confirmed that the mortgage was fully paid off, meaning Hank and Cindy now owned the ranch free and clear. This news sparked a huge celebration, and we partied well into the night. Amanda had an early flight to catch the next morning, so she could not stay. She left with a group of 6 other cars, all heading out together. Interestingly, her flight was out of a neighboring state, and she had already packed her belongings in her leased car before coming to the party. She skipped going back to her apartment, heading directly to the airport instead. No one noticed the man slipping out of her car in the parking garage, or the man walking about 50 feet behind her toward the international terminal. John Thompson couldn't leave the United States without his passport, but Mitchell Nelson's passport did not raise any eyebrows. No one batted an eye at the couple holding hands in adjoining first-class seats as they flew to Mexico City. There, Amanda transformed into Jimmy Nelson, joining Mitchell Nelson for their connecting flight to Ecuador. 2 days later, Greg and Samantha Cooper arrived at their hacienda on Costa Rica's Caribbean coast. Strangely, an old Chevy pickup, which looked suspiciously like the one that had vanished from Hank and Cindy's ranch, was waiting for them at the property. 2 weeks after the barbecue, a bench warrant was issued for John Thompson when he failed to show up for work. After 2 days of no call, no show, he was terminated, and no further payments were received by his ex-wife. When Hank and Cindy were summoned to court, they brought along a sharp-dressed lawyer who confidently argued that they had no obligation to John. He had merely rented a room from them and then disappeared without warning. They even countered with a lawsuit against him for unpaid rent. All they could tell the court was that he'd driven off in his old pickup one afternoon and never returned. Though the court was suspicious, there was no evidence to suggest otherwise. In the following years, Greg Cooper settled into life in the small Costa Rican village, running a charter fishing boat while his wife, Samantha, managed a cozy cantina. They were considered well off by local standards, and their hacienda became known for its comfort and luxury. Friends and family, including Hank and Cindy, visited often, and life was simple but enjoyable for Greg and Samantha. They quickly became beloved members of the community, always generous with donations when needed. Meanwhile, Greg continued dabbling in the stock market, setting up accounts for a few locals and helping them with finances. As for the notorious Judge Marie Matthews, a few years after my escape to Costa Rica, I was thoroughly amused to hear that Judge Matthews, known for her extreme rulings, was going through her own rough breakup. Her wife had left her, cheating with a man. Matthews was stuck paying child support, maintenance, and house payments for her ex, who promptly moved her new boyfriend into the home. They often appeared together in public as a couple, although they never officially married. Rumor had it they finally set a wedding date, conveniently 1 week after Judge Matthews' financial obligations would end. What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.